Power does not always roar. Sometimes it hides behind silence, sharp as a blade and heavier than fear itself. And those who truly understand the laws of human nature know that silence is not emptiness but command. For Machiavelli himself would remind us that the ruler who restrains his tongue holds the keys to the hearts and minds of men, while the one who cannot control his speech becomes a slave to his own voice. And if you look at the stage of history, you will see how silence has been the invisible throne upon which empires were built, because when a man chooses silence, he forces the world to lean closer, to guess, to project, and in their guessing they create fear. And fear, Machiavelli declared, is far more reliable than love, for love is fragile. It breaks with disappointment, but fear survives even in silence, perhaps especially in silence, because the silence of a powerful man is not the silence of emptiness, it is the silence of calculation, the silence of strength, the silence of one who sees more than he says, and in that gap between what he knows and what he reveals, power multiplies. For a man who cannot be read is a man who cannot be controlled, and it is better to appear unreadable, cold, distant, than to reveal everything through endless chatter, since every word you speak is a weapon handed to your enemies, but every word you withhold is a fortress wall built around your throne, and this is the dark secret. Silence is not passive, silence is aggressive, silence is a move in the chess game of power, for the weak think silence is retreat, but the strong know silence is advance. It is the invisible hand that moves the minds of others while you remain still, and this is why those who sit in silence are often misunderstood, feared, and even hated, because people cannot fight what they cannot read, and they cannot predict what they cannot hear, and so they tremble in the presence of one who is silent, because his silence is a mirror, and in that mirror they see their own fears, their own insecurities, their own guilt. And they begin to imagine monsters that were never there, and in imagining those monsters, they grant you power without you demanding it. For Machiavelli warned that the prince must never waste his strength in trying to be loved or in trying to explain himself, but rather he should keep his intentions hidden and let men believe what they wish. For in their beliefs lies his advantage. And silence is the perfect mask, more durable than a crown, more terrifying than a sword, because it makes you unknowable, and the unknowable is always more feared than the known, since a loud enemy may threaten but you can measure him. Yet a silent one leaves you blind, and blindness breeds terror, and so silence becomes a weapon of psychological war, and you must understand this. In every relationship, in every argument, in every negotiation, silence bends the game in your favor. For when two men argue, the one who speaks less often wins, not because he is right, but because the one who speaks more reveals his emotions, exposes his weaknesses, and surrenders his control, while the silent one watches, learns, calculates, and waits for the perfect moment to strike. And this law holds true from the courts of kings to the offices of modern corporations. For the executive who can remain silent at the negotiating table, watching as the opponent fills the void with nervous words, gains more concessions without asking than he could have gained by pleading, because silence creates discomfort, and discomfort forces the other to move, while you remain still, and he who moves first, Machiavelli would say, is already weaker, because he shows his hand, while the one who does not move makes the world revolve around him. And this is why, in the presence of truly powerful men, silence is not absence but presence. It presses down on the room like gravity. It forces others to adjust, to stumble, to break themselves against the weight of it, while the silent one remains untouched. And this is why silence is the highest form of discipline, because the weak cannot endure it. They feel the urge to speak, to justify, to explain, to scream, to cry, and in their noise they betray themselves, but the strong endure the discomfort of silence, and in that endurance they dominate. For silence is patience turned into power, and patience, as Machiavelli taught, is the friend of rulers, because men destroy themselves with haste, but the ruler who waits, who watches, who remains silent, chooses his moment like a hunter, choosing the exact second to release his arrow, and that arrow, released in silence, kills more certainly than 1,000 loud threats ever could. And so you must understand, if you wish to master power, you must first master silence. For silence is not only the absence of noise, it is the presence of control. Control over yourself and control over others. And he who controls himself commands respect, while he who loses control becomes a fool, and nothing reveals loss of control faster than reckless speech. But nothing conceals your intentions, your strength, and your next move better than silence. So protect your silence as a king protects his fortress, for within its walls lies the empire of your power. Silence is the hidden throne upon which true rulers sit, and if in the first lessons you have seen how emperors, generals, and leaders have wielded silence as their sharpest weapon, then now you must understand how this principle weaves itself into every fiber of human psychology, for men are not only frightened by what is said, they are far more frightened by what is left unsaid. And Machiavelli knew that the strength of a ruler is not in his ability to speak endlessly, but in his ability to hold back, to allow his silence to echo in the minds of others, creating doubts, fears, and speculations, for words end once spoken. But silence lingers, it festers, it grows, it becomes a storm within the minds of others, and this storm does more damage than 1,000 threats because threats can be measured and prepared for. But silence leaves no preparation, and when the people cannot prepare, they surrender to fear, and this fear gives the silent man his crown. And think of Sun Tzu, the master of strategy, who declared that all warfare is based on deception, and silence is the purest form of deception, because when you remain silent, your enemies deceive themselves. They create fantasies about your strength, your plans, your intentions, and those fantasies are almost always greater than reality, making your silence more powerful than your actions. And look at Winston Churchill, who, though known for words, also understood the silence of pauses, delivering speeches that struck like hammers because each pause carried the weight of silence that forced the audience to lean in. And every pause made his next word thunder. And so too in the world of business, where titans like Steve Jobs mastered the art of the silent pause, unveiling products only after long silences that built tension until the crowd erupted. For in silence lies anticipation, and anticipation is the mother of power. And you must also remember that silence is not only about the words you refuse to say, but the emotions you refuse to display, because the man who controls his silence also controls his face, his gestures, his reactions, and in that control he becomes unreadable, and the unreadable are always untouchable, while those who reveal everything in noise and expression are easy to manipulate, easy to break. And if you look to the courts of history, you will find countless rulers destroyed by their tongues, kings who spoke too much, promised too much, revealed too much, and in their noise they gave weapons to their enemies, but those who kept their silence carried their secrets to the grave and left behind empires, and Machiavelli warned the prince to appear wise without revealing his true thoughts, to smile without showing his hand, to listen while others destroy themselves with speech. And in this way, silence is not only survival but conquest, for in silence you conserve your energy while your rivals exhaust theirs. In silence you watch their mistakes while making none of your own. In silence you keep your secrets while stealing theirs, and so you rise, slowly, silently, inevitably, while they fall into the trap of their own noise. And even in the intimate chambers of relationships, silence holds the knife. For when you withdraw into silence, others chase, they panic, they crave your attention, they break themselves against the wall of your indifference, proving the cruel but eternal truth. The one who cares less always controls more, and silence is the greatest weapon of the one who dares to care less. And so you must practice this dark discipline, not by never speaking, but by speaking with precision, letting silence do the heavy lifting, letting silence be the shadow that amplifies every word, every look, every gesture, until your presence becomes magnetic, until your silence becomes unbearable to others, and they cannot help but revolve around you like planets around a sun they cannot touch. And this is the final Machiavellian lesson. Do not waste your life chasing noise, for the loud man burns bright but brief, while the silent man burns slow and eternal. And when the crowd is gone, when the speeches are forgotten, when the noise fades into dust, it is the silent one who remains, feared, respected, obeyed, for silence does not die, it endures, and in that endurance lies true power. So hold your silence like a sword, sharpen it with patience, wield it with discipline, and know that in silence you will discover the ultimate throne, where power comes not from the noise you make, but from the silence you master.